Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is the JWT Authentication tutorial, part 2. And in today's video, we're going to be setting up a Express web server and connecting it to a database. Now the tech stack we're going to be using for this is Node.js, TypeScript, PostgreSQL for the database, Express.js for the web server framework, and yeah, that's it. And by the way, for the ORM, or essentially what we're going to use to connect to our database, we're going to be using one called Prisma. And yeah, that'll be in later videos. But anyways, without further ado, let's get started. And the reason I'm using TypeScript is because it's a lot more syntax friendly and easier for the developer. And if you don't use it yet, I highly recommend you do. Okay, now without further ado, let's get started. So, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a folder for a project. So to do that, make a new terminal using whatever terminal program you use. I use one called iTerm. And if you're on a Windows, you'd be using command prompt. And if you're on a Mac, you'd be using terminal. And I am on a Mac, but this is an external terminal program. Once you've done that, you're going to type cd desktop, which is going to change the directory to your desktop. Finally, we can type make dir to make a directory or a folder, and we're going to call it JWT Auth tutorial. Now I'm going to cd into that folder, so I'm going to type cd JWT Auth tutorial. Once you've done that, we need to open up that folder in our text editor. In order to do that, I'm going to use a text editor called Visual Studio Code. So that's my text editor that I like to use, but you can use any text editor you'd like. So in order to open it, if you have Visual Studio Code installed, then you should have the CLI installed called code. So all you have to do, you have to go to the terminal and type in code and then dot. Sorry about that. Which will open up the your folder in the in Visual Studio Code. So now that you've done that, we're going to open up a terminal in that path or inside this folder, and then we're going to type npm init-y, which is going to initialize a package.json, which is like a place where you can store what all your dependencies are, and names for what your project is and all that other stuff. Yeah, okay, I don't know why that errored, but anyways, once we've done that, we need to install the dependencies or the modules or libraries we're going to be using. So libraries we're going to be needing is, so I'm going to be using Yarn as my package manager, but you can use Express. I mean, you can use npm if you want. I just like using Yarn better now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do yarn add express express JSON web token TypeScript .env cores consola and body parser. So these are all the main dependencies we need. Express is our web framework. JSON web token is, of course, the JSON web token library, so you can use JSON web tokens. TypeScript is for using TypeScript. .env is to have env files. Cores is a middleware. Body parser is a middleware, and consola is a logger. Now I'll have this in the description for you to install, so you don't have to type all this. Now we're going to hit enter, and it's going to install those dependencies for you. Now we're going to install all the dev dependencies. So we're going to do yarn add with a -d flag, which will mark it whatever we're going to install. We're going to install it as a dev dependency. Over here, I'm going to need typings or type definitions for body parser, types for cores, types for express, and types for JSON web token. Wait for that to install. And after that, we're also going to install 3 more dev dependencies called Prettier, TS Node, and TS Node Dev. prettier is going to format our code, and TS node and TS node dev is used to start our code or run our code. Once we've done that, we have all our dependencies. And what I actually want to do is I want to create a new file called .getignore, which will, if you're using a GitHub, if you want to push your code to GitHub, it'll be like it'll basically be a place where you can type all the files you want Git to ignore when you push it to Git. So I'm going to ignore the node modules folder. Okay, cool. So on our package.json, I'm going to create a couple of scripts to start our server. So in main over here, I'm going to set the main to source/app.ts, since that's what our main is going to be, and we're going to make those files in a sec. And then for scripts, I'm going to have one called start, which is going to run with ts node source/app.ts. Second one is going to be dev, which is going to start with ts node dev. So we're going to do ts node dev /transpile only /pull source/app.ts. So basically for this script, whenever we hit save, it's going to automatically restart it for us. And finally, we're going to add a lint script to format our code using prettier. So you can just do prettier --write dot, and we can use that prettier CLI because we installed it here. So that's basically it for the package.json. Now let's get TypeScript set up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create tsconfig. So I'm going to go to my terminal and type npx tsconfig.json. Now this is using a CLI called tsconfig.json, which will allow you to create a tsconfig depending on what you're making. So select node, and then your tsconfig will be created. Over here, under no unused locals and no unused parameters, I'm just going to set both of those values to false. What this will do is, if we, for example, if those are true, and if we have a variable that we don't use, then the TypeScript compiler will yell at us. If this is false, then it won't yell at us, which is exactly what we want. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make our web server. So I'm going to create a source directory for all of our stuff, and then I'm going to create a file called app.ts and then server.ts. Now this is going to be an object-oriented Express app, which means we're going to be using a class for the server, and we're going to be instantiating that class in the app.ts, and then we're going to be starting it over here as well. So this is the actual file that's being run by package.json. Nonetheless, let's get started. First thing we need to do is we need to import some libraries. So we're going to import Express from Express. Then we're also going to need Consola. So we're going to import Consola like this, and the class version like this from Consola. Now we didn't need to install at types/Consola because Consola already has its built-in types or TypeScript definitions. And now we're also going to need cores, which is a middleware for Express. So I'm going to import cores from cores. And we're also going to need body parser. So I'm going to do import asterisk as body parser from body-parser. Now I'm going to use .env, which is going to allow us to communicate with .env files to store some sensitive key value pairs. So I'm going to go and type import as .env from .env. Similarly to Consola, .env has its own TypeScript declarations. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a .env file for our port number we're hosting it on. Now this isn't really sensitive information, but I'm just going to keep it since it's a good key value pair, and we're going to have other key value pairs in the future. So I'm going to set the port to 3000, localhost 3000, and then in our server we can start. So as I said, this is going to be an object-oriented Express app. So this is going to be the class, the server is going to be a class. So you can do export class server, like that. And then, so over here I'm going to add a couple of objects. First one is going to be app, which is going to be express.application. So this is declaring a property called app equal to express.application. So we'll just define that this variable or this property app is express.application. Now we're going to define our logger, which will be consola equals consola. Okay, so that's that. And then now we need to create our constructor. So I'm going to do public constructor. I'm going to type this.app equals express. Okay, so now we're just instantiating express over here. Now express is a function, so that's why we're able to call it like this. Hopefully that makes sense. So now I'm going to add a couple of functions or methods to the class that we're going to be able to use. So I'm going to add public start, then private set config. Now private method is one that basically this private method is only accessible in this class, and a public method is accessible in any file. So under this, we're also going to create a method called setRequestLogger, which is going to set a request logger that's going to log our requests and their paths. And finally, this should be private. Finally, we're going to make private set routes, is where we're going to declare all of our routes. So that's that. Now in our public start, we're just going to call all these methods. So we're going to do this.setConfig, this.setRequestLogger, and this.setRoutes. Now, whenever a user calls a start method, all of these methods will be triggered. So now in our app.ts, we can instantiate that class. So I'm going to do import server from ./server. We can do const app equals new server. So we're creating an instance of that class. And then of that instance, we're running this start function, which is going to start our server for us. Okay, so now we can start filling out our methods over here. So over here, for the configs, we're going to set our middlewares. So I'm going to do app.use body parser.json, which is going to allow our application to accept JSON. We're also going to use body parser.url encoded extended equals true, which is a middleware body parser. And finally cores, which is another middleware for app, which is a function. Now we're going to set our request logger, which is going to log the requests and their path. You'll see in a sec. So if we can do app.use asynchronous, it's going to be an asynchronous function. Then you can pass in the request, response, and next function as a callback. And then we can just log. We're just going to use a regular, we're just going to use a regular console.log. And then we can do, it's going to be a formatted string. And then we can put the request on method. So it's going to show if it's a post, a get, patch, the method of the request, and the path it was sent to. That's that. And then we're going to use the next function to continue the process running. And finally, you can set our routes. So we can do app.get. So it's going to send a get request. It's going to be get request to the home page. Then over here, we want to send some data back. So I'm just going to send JSON saying success, true. And I always like to, always in my Express applications, my APIs like to show that if it's a success, if the success was true or false, it just makes things a lot easier. And then, And then we can do success true. Can do like message JWT Authentication or something like that. That should be good. So now let's actually try our application. I forgot. Over here, we also need to do .env.config, which is going to allow us to use .env. Now let's try starting our server. So I'm going to run yarn. Yarn dev, which is going to start our server for us. Okay, that's weird. Okay, let's try it now. Wait, what? let me try start. So yarn start. Okay, well that's not working, so let's try np. Let's just try executing it with ts node. Oh my god, okay. I was using this in the debug terminal. Okay, sorry. Okay. Let's run it now. Okay. Yarn dev. Okay. Sorry about that. So now we actually need to start our application. So we need to listen it on a port. So you can do app.listen port. Process.env.port, and this is going to take a function which will do this.logger.success server started on port. Okay, so now that's that, and let's try running it. So yarn dev. And you'll see it says that the server started on port 3000. Okay, so let's try heading over to that port and see if we get a response. So over here, let's go to localhost 3000. You can see it says success true, message JWT Authentication. So now that we know that it works. Okay, so that works. Now let's continue. So now that we've set up our web server, it's completely done. We need to set up our database. Now the database I'm using it's going to be called Prisma. It's going to be called PostgreSQL. It's a relational database management system. It's really popular. I like using it. And the ORM we're going to be using, or ORM, is going to be Prisma, which is going to allow us to connect to PostgreSQL. Now Prisma, the way it works is that it makes you define your models, your data models, in a separate file of its own file with a .prisma suffix, and then it reads your data model from there and gives you IntelliSense. So let's see how we can connect to Prisma. So we're just going to put a test data model for now, but then later on we're going to put stuff that's actually going to be for our auth. So what you want to do is you want to first download PostgreSQL. That shouldn't be very hard, and then you should start your server. So over here I'm using this one called Postgres app. So if you go to postgres.app, it'll take you to postgresapp.com, and this is the thing I'm using, which allows me to use PostgreSQL on a Mac. If you're on a Windows, try doing a little research. It should be pretty easy. Okay, so once you've installed that, you're going to go to the little elephant at the top if you're on a Mac. As I said, if you're on a Windows, it will slightly differ, but yeah, it should be pretty similar. And then you're going to click Start for your server. Now you can see our Postgres server is successfully running. Now, what I can do over here is I can go to the terminal and type in PSQL. Once you install Postgres, it'll give you a CLI for this. And over here, now we can type in our commands, our SQL commands. So I'm going to create a database, and by the way, you should know how SQL works. Okay, so I'm going to create a database called JWT _auth tutorial. Okay, sorry, I forgot the colon. Tutorial. Sorry. Okay, it created that database. So now we need to connect to that database. So we're going to do C JWT auth tutorial. Now we're connected to our database. So now let's go back to our script, our project, and let's install Prisma. So what we're going to do is you're going to make a new terminal, and you can type yarn add -d at Prisma /CLI, which is going to give you the Prisma CLI. Wait for that to stop. or finish. And then we're also going to add one called Prisma client, not as a dev dependency. So at Prisma/client, which is going to allow you to interact with Prisma. So it's Prisma's client. Okay, cool. So now we need to initialize a new Prisma project. So once you've installed CLI, you can do that by typing npx prisma init. It will give you a file or a folder called Prisma with prisma.schema. And this is what I was talking about the database, with the data models. And here are where you're going to define all the models. We'll get to that in a sec. Over here in your .env, you'll see that this database URL was generated, and this is what you're going to be using to connect to your application, your database. Over here, this is the username. So defaultly, it's going to be Postgres, and the password is also defaultly Postgres, but you can change that if you want. And then the port I'm hosting on is 5432, and you can check that by going over here and click server settings. I'll give you all the information. Okay, now we have to put in the name of the DB, which is going to be JWT Auth tutorial, and schema equals public. That's okay. So now over here, let's create our first data model. So let's create a model test. And over here, we can put in all of our rows. So you can put like, I don't know, key, type string. Let's put an ID. This can be like an int. You can see that Prisma gives you IntelliSense. And we're also going to mark this as an ID. We can put key string, some, I don't know, like key2 string. And that should make sense on how you can define your data models. So you can define any other data models you want. So yeah, you can keep on adding more. Now, as I said before, this isn't going to be for the actual thing we're going to make, the actual API. This is just for testing for this video. Okay, so once you've done that, we're going to be using something called Prisma Migrate to get all these tables inside of our database. All you have to do is you have to do Prisma init, npx Prisma, migrate. You can do the /preview feature, since this still it's not ready for production, but it's really good. And then dev. Wait for that to load. You can type in the name of your migration. I'm just going to say like first migration. After that, you can see it created this migrations folder with migrations.sql, and this is the SQL command that was run in your database. So that is a good way to get your database with the SQL you need, and that is it. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to show you how to send queries with your Prisma client, really simply. So later we're going to create a more advanced thing, but as I said, this is just for connecting to our database. So over here, we're going to import Prisma client. So I'm going to do import Prisma client. It's a class from Prisma at Prisma/client. Now over here, I'm going to create a new property called, it's going to be private Prisma client equals new Prisma client. Like that. So now you have our Prisma client with the name of Prisma, and now we can use it. So let's make a route. Let's make a route called send query. Let's make this public so you can call it from app. By the way, if you hear background noise, that's because my computer's fans are going crazy. Apologies for that. Okay, so over here you can basically send send your queries. So what I'm going to do over here is I can do const result equals, if you want to create something in the database, we can do okay, so we're actually going to make this an asynchronous function, and it's going to return a promise of void, type void. We can do await prisma dot this dot prisma dot and you can and then dot test dot create. So we're going to create some data on our database. Now this takes an object called data with all the stuff, with all the fields. Now over here you see we have ID, key, and key2. So we can just put in the stuff over here, and it has IntelliSense, which is great. So ID is of type int, so you can do like 1, key, I don't know, like test, key2, value, like that. So now it's going to create that in our database. And if we, and if we console log the result, you can see that the query has been sent. So now if we go to app.ts and we do app.sendQuery, you can see how it'll play out. Okay, looks like that's not working, so let's do Control-C to exit the terminal. And then let's do yarn start. And you can see it has been officially created, and it's created in our database. Okay, so that is basically it. I appreciate you for watching this video. In the next video, we're going to be making the actual routes for our API. See you in the next video. Bye.